The leopard just sat there, froze, didn't move a muscle, looking at us. Then suddenly it dropped down on all fours on its belly and it crept along the ditch and out of sight. And everyone just looked at each other in disbelief, thinking, wow, was that real what we just saw?
You say, well, I've seen this big cat, and some people just flatly refuse. They think that Britain's such a sweet little island, we shouldn't have predators that size.
I heard this growl behind me, nothing like a dog's growl, and just like anything else in life, you're sat on your own there. I don't care who you are, how brave you are, something like that will put the shivers up your spine.
As she was walking, before the cub came out, she flicked this tail. She literally flicked it in the air. And I simply could not believe what I was seeing. It was the most extraordinary feeling.
It threw its head back, he said, and it made this sort of round.
But when you actually realise that there are big cats living in Britain, it changes everything.
Welcome to Big Cat Conversations. We speak directly to people who've encountered one of Britain's big cats. We also discuss the bigger picture. Why are unofficial big cats being seen, and could these cats even be naturalising without us knowing? If you've had a big cat encounter in Britain and would like to discuss it, email me at rick@bigcatconversations.com. You can find other episodes on the website bigcatconversations.com. I'm Rick Minter, and thanks for joining me. Hello and welcome to episode 15 of Big Cat Conversations. It's the start of the new year, 2020. Happy New Year to everybody. For this episode, we are going to reflect on a series of incidents which happened in Spain, in Almeria, in 2016-17 and a bit beyond that. I was involved in contacting our guest and advising him for a while, so I was sort of sharing the experience on Skype at the time, and it's going to be really interesting to reflect on all of that now. And our guest is Peter J. Hughes, and Peter actually joins us on tour in Asia, and he's on the line from Komodo National Park, just a week after watching Komodo dragons. Peter, thanks for joining us. Welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure being on.
Okay, and I know 2 or 3 weeks ago you were communing with tigers and you've been seeing lots of wildlife on your travels, so lucky so-and-so. But I think we'd better just get back to business and reflect on scenes from Spain, from Almeria in 2016. Can you sort of set the scene and what happened when you first got suspicious about some unusual animal being around?
Yeah, well, I moved out to Spain, to Almeria in 2004. The thinking was, myself and my partner, who's an ecologist, was we were going to do a development project, but start from scratch and observe the whole process. So, starting without water, without electricity, without mobile phone communications, and really with very little language in a very remote area. The thinking behind that was rarely do people actually start from scratch. So we thought, well, we would go out there and restore this 600-year-old building that we'd bought. So that's what we were doing. And we were many years into the project. We'd bought a place that was 10 kilometres inland from the nearest town. It had a small village community around it, but the actual building was separated from the village by about 200 metres. So we would have volunteers coming and stay with us, and they were working on conservation projects. And then one night I went to bed and I woke up at about 3 a.m. after having a really strange dream. So I got out of bed and thought, well, I'll make myself a cup of tea and, just see what's happening on the internet. So I sat down and all of a sudden I heard this da-dump on the roof. And I thought, what on earth is that? Because to get onto the roof, there's one part of it that's only about 2 meters off the ground. And that's where I'd actually heard the sound. But then I started hearing footprints walking directly over the top of my head. Then they disappeared. So I got up, went to the front door, opened the front door, and there was this hell of a noise with a very large animal jumping over the top of my veranda, jumping down 3 meters and then darting off. And all I saw was the shadow of it, and it was gone in an instant. That was the first event. Then after that, I had a sequence of other strange events. One of them was I came back to my house and there was a hole in the hose pipe. And I looked at it and water was leaking all over the garden. But the thing about the hole was, it's as if a claw had been in there and actually made a hole. And because the threads were actually pulled out, so you could actually see the loop where something had pulled it out. So that was one event. And then the following day, I had a puncture on my car tyre. So I went and got it fixed, brought it back. And the following day, the same tyre had a puncture again. And then we found claw marks in a bucket, which had water in it. And the way that the claw marks was it was as if it had been sort of like lazily scratched in one part and then just dug in with great force, through this thick plastic. And if you were going to do it with any kind of knife, it would be a real effort. And to have done it in such a way, it was really obvious it was a claw mark. So that's how it all began.
Okay, and I remember you saying at the time, even just that very first noise on the roof, you almost instantly felt there's no other animal with the weight and the agility that can do that in this country. A, there's no animal around, indigenous, that can do that. And B, it just sounds like a cat in its agility and impact. And then you got the claw mark. So you were getting suspicious about what it was almost straight away, weren't you?
Yeah, I've been involved with conservation, environment, national parks, etc. for many, many years, since the 90s. So it immediately set my mind racing as to what it was. And, it was cat that came up. It was really the only possibility. And there was something also which was very specific for cats, and that was walking along the ledge. And that's why the noise disappeared sort of halfway along the roof. It actually then started walking along the ledge. And then we started noticing paw marks around the property. Because it was gravel, it was not so easy to tell what they actually were, but they were just huge. They were really large. And
the dog behaviour was giving away something as well, wasn't it?
Oh, definitely. I mean, living in such a location, we had a collie dog who was very well trained, pretty much 50% wild, pretty much 50% domestic. He would warn us of snakes, of scorpions, of lizards in the house, etc. So, he was really attuned to the environment. He would tell us. Sometimes he'd refuse to go outside. He'd want to be particularly close to us. He was the type of dog, he never backed down to any other dogs, but he met his match with this, whatever it was, this mysterious animal that was there. We thought, let's do a weight test. Let's put the dog on the roof, because we know the size of the dog, and just see how that relates to the sound that we'd heard before. So, with it being a flat roof, it's quite easy to put the dog there. He walked across the roof, and it was less than half the weight. That's what we sort of related it to being at the time. So we knew that we were up against a very heavy animal that was heavier than the dog and heavier than a human. And the episodes then started happening very, very frequently. What happened was I had some volunteers staying that were working on the projects. And of course, this was a lot more exciting than they expected. They were going to Spain and experiencing this wild cat odyssey happening. It's more like a safari experience for them. But, we used to sit out on the patio at night, and sometimes we would just hear this thrashing around, this charging that would be going on in random directions. The light wasn't good enough for us to see exactly what it was, but sometimes we would see just a shadow going past, and it was happening all the way around us. And there were 2 occasions where it actually charged us. We were sitting out there, there were about 6, 7 of us, and it literally charged towards us. But we were on a higher level, so there was no way that it could actually get to us. But we got very worried. We grabbed chairs and basically ran in the house. So when we talked about it afterwards, and there had actually been an event that had happened a couple of weeks before the cat had been on the roof. And that is my girlfriend at the time. She was Polish, and we'd seen a truck going behind the building, and that truck had scaffolding in it, which if that was in the UK, that would be completely normal. But in that particular part of Spain, they never use scaffolding for building. The only really real place that they actually have scaffolding is the local circus, when that comes to town. So we'd seen a vehicle going out the back. We knew it was from the circus. And there was an East European driving it, which my ex-girlfriend sort of figured out very quickly. And we sort of, started to piece the pieces of what was going on together. And we then did some research and found out that the authorities had been checking licenses, exotic animal licenses. And we found that they'd actually started in the north of the country around 2-3 weeks before these episodes began. Then the circus had moved into town. Then we'd seen the circus vehicle and then the cat instances. So we pieced it together that it was pretty much certainly the circus, although we couldn't prove it. And it was probably due to the fact that they didn't have a license. So there were various things that happened, but the local people, a lot of them didn't believe it. They'd only believe it if they actually saw it, whereas some of the local people had seen it.
Like the goat herder.
Yeah, the goat herder. Yeah, he had his goats being attacked by it. And he'd sent his dogs after the cat, and the cat had run off. But the goat herder was a bit of a funny character, and people didn't really believe him. And so he was like, so he just referred to it as the pest. And, he'd say, the pest has been after my goats again. And people just didn't really believe him at first because he was the first person actually to have an actual sighted experience with this. And then these episodes started happening to us. We had various people, probably in the early days, at least 5 or 6 of us that had actually heard it or seen the bits of evidence around. And so, it became a great activity, for all the volunteers there to try and help piece together this puzzle.
You did have, over the months, 2 or 3 volunteers who did see it very clearly and very well, and their views were consistent. And a couple of them didn't even know that you hadn't even briefed them on that prospect of a cat being around, yet they came to you saying, Peter, do you know what I've just seen? You won't believe this, but I've just seen a black panther. Is that right?
Well, one of the instances, I was actually in the middle of explaining it to the person who had just arrived during the day. And obviously, arriving to a remote house, the first thing you mention is just about the house. And by now, it got to the early evening. And it was like, we forgot to mention, but we'll go into this. We have had some strange noises. We've seen some strange markings. The goat herder believes that there's, a wild cat here. We think there's a wild cat here, and we were literally explaining it to him. And as we were explaining it, we saw it go past. And and it was almost like, is that what you're talking about? And it's like, yes.
Yes. Yeah. All the time you were, people have mixed emotions about them when they're visiting their property in Britain, because all kinds of things about, is it dangerous? I don't want to endanger it. I don't want to make it feel threatened and lash out at me. But you were having that with a vengeance there, because this was one clearly fresh out of captivity that was much more unpredictable, because it was learning the ropes and coming to terms with being out and fending for itself. And so you were noticing that kind of remonstration that it was demonstrating, and the fact that it wasn't scared of being, it was almost used to being by humans, but by doing that, even though it might not have meant to be dangerous, it was potentially endangering you guys.
Well, exactly. Really, we were dealing with an animal that looks like it in a domestic environment or in a circus environment. All of a sudden, perhaps for the first time, having life in the wild, not knowing how to handle it, but hearing human voices around and therefore trying to sort of interact with us. But most of this being pitch black, because it really is in a renewable energy house. So there was limited lighting around. So it was really a very, very bizarre experience, because most of the time we were really having to use our sense of sound. It was an auditory experience that was going on in the dark. And so therefore it was actually very scary for a lot of people. And I know that you gave us some excellent advice to wear torches on our heads if we go out at night and to carry a stick. And we made that absolute policy. And, I said to people, if you're inside the house, during the day, it's okay. Obviously, we stay close to the house, but as soon as it starts getting towards dusk, that's when, if you're going outside, carry a broomstick with you and
scan with the beams for eye shine before you do anything.
Yeah.
Just like you would be on camp in South Africa or whatever, with leopards around or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, also to get it into perspective, we had people stay that had been regularly capturing wild animals or wild cats in South Africa. And they were sort of saying to us, it's so easy to be sort of Hollywood influenced, as it were, with any kind of wild animal. Important to listen to what the experts say, important to take an objective view and just realise that people go out in the bush and sleep in tents. This happens every day. It's very rare that you do hear of anything really going wrong.
Yes.
So we were behind thick walls, and I know in a situation like this, it's always different if the animal actually gets inside the house. We just had policies to always close the doors, always carry sticks at night. If we were going out at night and coming in, we would drive as close to the house as we could get, which was very close, and go in. And we just accepted that we were coexisting with this animal.
And you could see the reaction of guests, because some guests wanted to stay longer because they thought it was exciting, and others, even in the same family, wanted to leave as soon as they could. Is that right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there was one girlfriend insisted that a stick went to bed with her and her boyfriend. So boyfriend one side of the bed, her the other, and a stick in the middle. And the following day she wanted to leave. So she was an Airbnb guest. So I think this was not the standard accommodation on Airbnb that she'd expected.
Yeah, we need to hear about the police, that your sort of interactions with the police.
So what happened is we'd had by now various encounters. There were local people that had seen it, a few local people. The local mayor had seen it, and he'd actually tried, in fact, while you and I were Skyping one night, he tried to shoot it, but fortunately missed. So there was definitely a sense of concern amongst a few people. Most people were just like, no, I don't believe any of it. It's all a load of nonsense. That's what most people thought. And so our thinking was, we'll explain to you the situation. Either believe it or don't believe it, but it's up to you. But we've given you the information. That's, our due diligence here. So what happened was, I thought by this time, whatever was there, it's time to go and speak to the police about it. So it was obviously quite a big move, because English expat living in Spain, not speaking fluent Spanish, but speaking enough to communicate. But obviously having to communicate a pretty off-the-wall subject. So I turned up to the police station, and they said, you're going to have to go to another police station. So they sent me to another one, and I had bits of evidence with me. I walked in there, and immediately I was being interviewed by 6 policemen at once in Spanish. I explained it as best I could, pulled the evidence out, showed them all of it, and out of the 6 in the room, 5 of them were completely on my side and believed it, and one of them was completely not. And he was just saying, it's all a load of nonsense, and, et cetera, et cetera. So, but fortunately, the 5 others won him over. They decided to sort of come up and refer it on to specialists to come up and interview us, and which is what happened. So, I mean, they sent various people up, various policemen up, and in a way it sort of became a bit of a joke with the volunteers. We'd have quite a long night out because it's hot there, sitting out quite late at night, going to bed, and then at sort of 8 o'clock in the morning it'd be, Pete, the police are here again. So, and it'd be another police department. So we had, that happened probably about 6 or 7 times. So I was going down giving statements and things. And one morning I was giving a statement, and the police had sort of said to me, this is really difficult for us to deal with. There's 10 kilometres by 10 kilometres of land out the back of here. We don't know if it's transient. Even if we tried to catch it, we may well fail. I said, yes, I realise that. It's very, very hard to capture these. And so the police said, we're just going to really observe the process. We're not really going to take major action with this, and I just said, well, I fully understand. It's exactly what the other people I've spoken with, that's what they think. There doesn't really seem to be a very obvious danger, especially as we had noticed that the cat had actually started to get used to being in this environment. But then one evening, I was interviewed by the Guardia Civil, which is another police department from another station. And we were standing there in the big riverbed area outside the front of the building. And it was towards dusk. And there was one of the policemen was sort of on side, going along with the story and believing it. The other one was extremely cynical. He was just, arms crossed and just like sort of shaking his head saying, no, don't believe any of this. But then what happened was my dog then started barking really aggressively, like, woo, 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 like this, repeatedly. Now, the policeman that was kind of not really believing this turned around and looked at the dog and said to me, does your dog, normally do this? I said, never. And then all of a sudden, the penny dropped. It's dusk. The dog's barking like this. He's trying to warn us all. It's coming. So I said to the police, it's coming. Prepare yourself. And they did. They grabbed the guns, pulled them out, grabbed the torches, and literally within 2 or 3 seconds, it was charging towards us. And the police said, hide behind the car to me, which, using a police car as a shield in this situation, it wasn't an ideal scenario. But they ran off, literally. They ran up, both up the Rambler with the guns out, with the torches out, and it turned around and it just shot off. So, and when they came back, I sort of said to them in Spanish, I said, non-native species correct? And they said, yes, non-native species correct. And after that, it was in a way a bit of a game changer, because then the police had actually witnessed it.
Yeah.
They knew it was real.
I remember you saying that before that, the cynical one was giving you quite a bit of intimidation, and he was actually sort of saying, well, where is it then? As if you could conjure up a cat out of the wilderness behind you. But then on cue, it did come anyway.
Yeah, exactly. But I think the funny thing is, though, is that he was sort of, where is it? But I think all the other police at that particular police station had actually talked him around to it. And then there was a whole group of cyclists. I don't know how many, but about 12 or 15. And they'd all witnessed it about 20 miles away. So, they were mountain biking in the hills and they all saw it. So after that, and the police were actually very good. They came back to me and they said, look, we've really got absolutely perfect witness situation now. It's been cited by multiple people all together, all at the same time. We know it's real, but again, we're not going to do anything about it because we don't perceive it as a risk. If it becomes a risk, if something happens, then obviously we'll do something. But, we have to just consider that it's benign, in this situation.
But they were sort of gently passing the baton to you to take responsibility if anybody needed to take responsibility, which you felt under pressure then, because you felt that if you were going to have to deal with it, you were going to have to get it right. Mm-hmm. And if you messed up, there could be consequences, which is...
Exactly. I mean, there was a slight difference in the way that different police were, because they've got different departments, but the way that they were relating to this. And because they knew that I had loads of contacts in the cat world and et cetera, they were like, well, you know more about it than us. It's your problem. You deal with it.
Yeah.
It was, some of them were saying that. So I was like, okay. So we did actually get a cage in. And we spoke to a Dutch organisation, and they said, well, look, if you catch it, you can bring it to us. We have massive enclosures in Spain and in Holland. We're a really big organisation. We'll help you with this. So they were completely on board. But then another police department came along, and what happened was actually, ironically, the goat herder who... Actually, there was another episode where we had actually saved him from the cat, because it was up on the hillside and we'd all whistled really loudly and the cat ran off. But however, he kind of turned on us because we had the cage there. We were, prepared to catch this with professional help. And he was sort of saying to the policeman, no, I don't like them having this cage here. It's in a national park. You're not meant to have a cage. And so he sort of made a bit of a big deal about it. And I sort of said to him, look, we're actually trying to help you. But he didn't see it like that. And in actual fact, what he did was he gave up goat herding, which it was a bit of an irony, really. There was us trying to help the village and help the situation and even help the police. Yeah. But whilst one lot of police wanted us to do that, another lot were like, hang on a minute, we're not sure about this, but based upon the complaint from him. So it ended up being 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. And there was something else that had happened, which actually was very curious. And that was that it started giving us gifts. It started bringing us birds in the way that a domestic cat does, and lizards. And we'd heard some vocalizations. And in the early days, it was this sort of... and before charging, which was like a mock charge sound, whereas afterwards we were getting the sort of out breath, which was just like a relaxed sound, which
more like chuffing,
Yes, chuffing, exactly. I explained that to you, and you said, that means kind of I'm okay, you're okay in, cat language.
Yeah. Let's have a stress-free passing of the ways, yeah.
Yeah, which kind of fitted exactly what was going on. I mean, it had gone from certainly being a cat that was incredibly stressed, behaving in really bizarre ways, charging towards us and all sorts of things, damaging the property, to actually just accepting us as being there and us accepting that the cat was there and just allowing it to be.
Yes, yeah.
So it was actually a good experience in the end.
Yes. Can we quickly go to the cage issue? On the cages, when somebody puts a cage out, I'm always concerned that the cage will capture anything but the target species. So it could get crows or squirrels or other people's dogs or whatever. Yeah. And you had a South African visitor who'd actually captured leopards on his uncle's or dad's farm or something, and he made a very good point about using logs, didn't he? Which you were about to before I think the police sort of warned you off having the cage, but because the cat can clamber up the logs and get into the cage, but if it's baited enough, which is another challenge anyway, but other animals won't be so adept at scrambling up the logs. So that's an interesting tweak to the trapping scenario. And also a tip that I learned from South Africa was just animate the area where you want to draw the cat into by hanging up feathers like partridge or pheasant feathers so it's got something, some movement of its prey to draw it. So you were trying things like that, weren't you?
That was it. That's exactly right. We were baiting with feathers and feathers and marmite, which had both worked brilliantly. So we had actually created reactions from it by putting the feathers on, because we all the time we had the cage there, it was always closed. We never ever actually used it in order, we were trying to climatize the cat to the cage as being a safe place. And the other factor is that we figured that if it had actually come from the circus, which we really genuinely believe that that's exactly where it had come from, then to some extent it would probably be absolutely dying to go back into the cage, just because that would mean that it would be getting regular food. And it's very easy for us to kind of anthropomorphize that an animal, as soon as it gets out of a relationship with humans, wants to just run away and be in the wild and never have contact with humans again. Perhaps that's true, but equally we believe, just based upon the behavior of this cat, that there was some level of security that it was getting from actually being around humans. Yeah. And although it liked being wild, it liked being in contact with humans too.
Yeah, these are tricky judgments, aren't they? Very tricky. Also, I mean, I think you felt that there are some situations where trapping and removing an animal from the wild is ethically dubious. I mean, here that wasn't quite the case, was it? Because it was presumably the only one. It wouldn't have found a mate, and there wasn't a lot. There's not a lot of small, medium or large mammals in that landscape, is there, for it to predate on? So I was reckoning it was probably largely getting lizards on the rocks, which would be quite easy for a cat to swipe and get. And you wouldn't need sort of much training in that. Maybe we could go on to the wild boar incident in a second then.
Yeah, well, so what happened was whilst one of the police interviews was going on one morning, two hunters turned up, and the police have been sort of trying, keep this all a little bit kind of quiet, under wraps for us, please, because obviously tourist town, we don't want holiday makers, obviously choosing not to come within 100 kilometres of the area because they have got a fear of this cat. So, we were certainly on side with that. And so whilst that kind of conversation was going on with the police, they were like, we're just kind of monitoring this, we're just assessing it, we're using your help and your experts as well, but let's just not make a big deal out of this. Let's try and keep the whole thing quite quiet. So that was a conversation one morning, and as that conversation is happening, pickup truck pulls up outside and two local elderly men get out, one carrying a gun, because they carry guns quite a lot there in that environment. And so they walk up to the house. I'd never spoken to them before, but I had seen one of them before, so I knew that he was a local character. And so I said to him, what do you want? And he said, oh, you're the guy that's had these experiences with this big cat, aren't you? And I said, well, there are a few things going on. We're not exactly sure. We're just sort of looking at all the information at the moment and all the evidence. And he said, no. He said, we've had a really serious encounter with this last night. It happened right outside of our house. What happened was there was a charging of lots of animals, and all of a sudden there was a screaming. And a wild boar had been basically cut in half by this cat. And so he had been in his house, one side of the track, and his friend had been in a house the other side of the track, which is like 150 meters away, and they both heard it. 12 o'clock at night, came out with their guns, and when they got there, they'd obviously disturbed it. So they saw it in the car lights, and it basically ran off, but it ran off with half the prey. So what it had done is it had cut the boar in half and taken it away. And so as soon as we said that, the police were overhearing all this, and all of a sudden it was like, quick, jump in the cars, let's go down to the site. So we got in the cars, went down to the site, and it was really obvious what had happened. There was half the wild boar there. Now, bearing in mind, in this area in Spain, there's lots of kind of semi-wild dogs, lots of cats, there's foxes around. If ever there's any kind of carrion in the riverbed, animals will take it. They will always, it'll be cleaned up immediately. And this was just sitting there. So, that was the first sign. But then you can see drag marks, and then you can see paw prints, and then you could see paw prints with claws out and blood. So it obviously, what happened is they'd turned up, it taken half of it away, and eaten it, in an olive grove. And from that, we got some really good prints, actually. So we got the plaster of Paris kit out. And
yeah, I remember you saying that the noises of the dispatch were prolonged, and that chimed with our thoughts that this wouldn't be an efficient killer because it hadn't been taught to sort of kill medium-large prey. And so the dispatch wasn't an easy thing for the predator or the prey in this situation. But that was a turning point. Didn't this guy actually realise then that if you messed up shooting, trying to dispatch this cat amongst the local shooters who wanted to try and do that, it was very dangerous? And didn't he call his men off? Because wasn't he one of them involved in the local hunting association?
He was the head of the hunting association, yeah. And so it was a very difficult situation because the police were kind of putting a bit of responsibility onto myself with it to make assessments and to get information from international experts. But yet there was obviously this issue of this would be the prize kill for the local hunters. So they'd love to come here and, or come to the place and actually successfully hunt it. So it was a case of it really is better to keep the story under wraps. And they were very responsible. Although he was head of the hunting association, he just said, I see this as a very different situation to hunting other animals, and there's no way we're going to keep this under wraps. And I use all my influence in the area to just make sure that there is no hunting going on.
Yeah.
However, cool. I was going into there were bars that I stopped drinking in because one of them was very much a bar with quite a few hunters in, and they kept questioning me on this. And I knew that they were just trying to get information out of me in order to come up themselves and try and hunt it, which is obviously what I was wanting to avoid. And part of the idea of having the cage there was actually a bit of a red herring, to just sort of say to people, no, we're dealing with it. We're conservationists, we're dealing with this, etc., to give them a red herring so they didn't think, oh, well, it's still running wild. We have to deal with it and look after this situation. Our family's welfare depends upon it, type of thing, which was the type of justification that could have been going on.
Yeah.
So, but then there was another incident that happened, which was quite extraordinary, which sort of showed how concerned, in a way, the whole area was about the presentation of this situation. There was a local businessman with an internet shop, and he decided for a joke to, Photoshop a jaguar onto a local environment, which everybody would know. And he just put it up on his Facebook page as a joke. Oh, look, this is what we found by the water tank. And a few people put comments. But the police didn't find it funny at all. So they really did take it very seriously.
They were worried that that could be taken the wrong way and could affect visitors' attitudes and visitors not staying in the area. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, okay, the fine was a lot, but I agreed with them. There was no point really in trying to make a circus of it.
Yeah.
It was really about
keeping responsible and dealing with it.
Exactly. Yeah. Is there really analysing? Is there a danger? My assessment at the beginning was with the bizarre behaviour. At first, it certainly seemed that way, but later on, it was obviously using the whole territory. It found its feet. It adapted to that environment, and there was actually a mutual friend of ours, Peter Taylor, that came along and stayed the night, and we had a discussion, and his view as well was that really it's okay for it. If it's okay with you, it's okay with the police. Most of the villagers don't believe it. A few do, but they're not too bothered. The hunters clearly don't want to hunt it. It's not really doing any harm.
Yeah. I was picking up the various different pressures and stresses on you from the different parties involved. And that was very wearing for you at the time, I remember. But also my main thought and my main advice, and you, I think, found this sort of partly helpful and partly unhelpful, was to say, Peter, if you do down the line need to influence anybody about rehoming this cat or for whatever scenario, to try and get it with camera traps, to try and absolutely get it comprehensively to say to people, this is it, this is what I'm talking about, here's a picture of it. And I know that we struggle with that anywhere where these animals are out. And I thought you may have a chance there. But of course, you found that, again, the cheap camera traps are rubbish and it's very difficult, particularly at night where they don't illuminate well. And so although you did try with the camera traps, it was very challenging, and you didn't really. All you got was the local dogs, and a small cat.
Yes, exactly. And I mean, there were a few sort of mysterious photos that we got, and we just looked at them and thought, "What on earth is this?" We didn't find what we wanted at all.
Yeah,
it was actually a lot of work going out because I mean, it is the hottest part of Europe, and I mean, this was mainly unfolded right in the middle of the summer. So I mean, it's 40 degrees, and we're running around sort of setting up cameras just before dusk. And I mean, we did a lot of it with the volunteers, but that landscape is so rocky, and there's so much grass is there that moves, so the cameras are getting set off all the time. There's so many insects. So you'd end up after the day or after the week sitting there looking through thousands of photographs of moving grass and insects.
Yes.
You'd actually be lucky if you got a domestic cat or a dog, but we didn't get our big predator. So, but then it was a very strange situation because on one hand, there was this sort of thinking, empirical science, we need the proof, we need the evidence, etc., etc. On the other hand, it was, well, if we have that evidence, then all of a sudden people are going to feel like they've really got to take responsibility for this. And it creates a different situations that could end up causing hunters to get the wink to go out there and try and hunt it.
Yeah.
So in a way, we knew it was there. We wanted the evidence, but we actually didn't want the evidence.
Yeah.
Because of the implications of getting the evidence.
Yes, it would have nudged you to a different scenario where you might want to take some action. But even then, the whole business of capturing it in a cage and then having it in a cage totally stressed out, and they can damage and injure themselves, particularly their canine teeth when they're in a cage, and become very dangerous if they're not settled.
Yeah.
So that was a ball game which I think nobody would have easily wanted to get into. So again, these pressures were just extreme for you all the time. And for me, it was constantly, I could really reflect on how different your situation was from property owners back in Britain, where the animals rarely misbehave, rarely pose a threat, and are rarely showing that they're stressed. And you had very different situation with what seemed obviously freshly out of captivity and freaking out a bit initially. But again, your observations on its behaviour. I remember you were saying that you'd sometimes go back to Britain for a couple of months, and when you came back, you felt there were signs that it had sort of reclaimed the place and it had sort of taken the opportunity to be closer to the building while you were away.
Exactly. It did this, it would break branches, thick branches high up, that, just in order to mark its territory, as it were. But it would sort of do that closer to the house. And we'd see paw prints closer. And there was a dustbin, because when you came out, I think you saw the dustbin. And I mean, this was extraordinary because it was like a normal old style English plastic dustbin that had been smashed from the inside outwards.
Yeah.
So something with great strength had put a paw inside and pushed it outside. So it's almost like, misbehaving because we weren't there.
Yeah.
It was very strange. And I mean, we really did, have developed some sort of relationship. And I'd go outside and just hear it breathing. Probably about 30, 40 feet away from me.
Yeah. And
it could hear me. In that environment, I mean, I know we sort of spoke about this, but it was a case of if we ever did come up against it or directly with it, to be very human, and to be larger than life in that situation. Sure. Not to be timid, not to be belittled, and not to run from it, essentially, to basically stand your ground no matter what. That was always very much drilled into everybody that was there. Yeah. That's really sort of what we felt we had to do. But I mean, there was one very funny night, actually, when we were out on the patio. We were sitting there, and it was quite early on in this. And we sort of said, we'd figured it out that it had come from the circus, or we were pretty sure that it had come from the circus. And somebody said, well, if we happen to hear it, maybe we should all start clapping and cheering, which is what happened. It didn't happen that night, but the following night we were sitting out there. There were about 7 or 8 of us, and we heard it all charging and running around. So instead of running in the house, we all just sat there and clapped and cheered and whistled, and it calmed down. It just calmed down. So I mean, it was extraordinary.
Our word of the week for this episode is Xeric, spelt Xeric, and Xeric is derived from xeros, the Greek word for dry. And a xerocole is a desert animal, so an animal adapted to live in arid conditions. And I ought to quickly emphasise we are not talking about big cats. Big cats are not xeric animals. A xerocole is an animal which must overcome lack of water and excessive heat. And they include animals like camels and the fennec fox, the fox which lives in the desert with its unusually large ears, and those are for dissipating heat. Some xerocoles will burrow out of the heat or be mainly shade-dwelling, and many will be nocturnal or crepuscular, active at dawn or dusk, to avoid daytime sun and high temperatures. And I've simply used Xeric to talk about the challenges that cats have in terms of hydration in dry environments. And as we heard, it seemed evident that the stranded panther which Peter encountered was seeking out water around his house. Almeria, where Peter was, is a semi-arid landscape, and the vegetation could be described as xeric scrub. And across their range in the world, leopards do live in exactly these type of semi-arid, semi-desert conditions. And so do pumas in parts of North America, such as the drier, arid zone states like parts of Utah, New Mexico, California, and Arizona. And leopards and pumas will, of course, drink regularly from fresh water sources if they have the chance. My friends in America tell me to put my camera traps here in Britain, watching over places like farm ponds and the like, where there is a fresh water supply and which may lure the cats to that water. But these cats we're talking about, leopards and pumas, can tolerate drier conditions because they get some of their hydration from the water content of their prey, and they will even take advantage of morning dews on vegetation. This is simply another example of just how versatile and adaptable leopards and pumas are, as we keep saying in the podcasts. But the dry conditions must have been a particular struggle for the cat around Peter's property if it was fresh out of captivity, as we suspect. So, there's our word of the week, Xeric. At this time, when it occurred, you weren't aware of the British situation, really, Peter, that there were cats being seen, reported in Britain, and they were really elusive and stealthy and semi-invisible. But what are your reflections now on on that one compared to the British situation? And has it made you think about what we're handling here in Britain?
Yeah, well, I think in a way there is a real parallel. And it's only because, yeah, you're right. I came to understand and to learn this through having the experience myself, and then researching your work and looking, at other cases that you've had in the UK, and looking at the surveys that, you've collected at shows and events and things. And just, it really did make me realise there's a lot of people that have had parallel experiences or similar experiences in the UK. But I think the real interesting parallel is that the UK situation could have happened perhaps, or certainly been influenced from the time in the 60s, 70s, when all of a sudden there was a clampdown on animal licenses were enforced in the UK for wild animals. And that seems to be what was, what happened in this situation with this circus one in Spain. Somebody was keeping this animal, all of a sudden they could get into trouble for having it, and they just decided to let it go. And so, yeah, I do see the parallels, but certainly I'm a lot more aware of it in the UK now, having spoken with you so much. Definitely.
Yeah, and what do you think about the general situation of big cats in the UK? Are you okay about it, or do you feel that we're too complacent, or do you got any views on it?
Well, I think that when there are, well, again, I'd look at a parallel. I mean, the truth is that overall there wasn't a procedure in Spain of how to deal with the situation there. I sort of get the feeling that you can only pick up so many anomalies and say, well, that's an anomaly, there's another anomaly, there's another anomaly, until you actually say, well, we've actually got a pattern going on here. There's actually some consistency to this situation. We need to come up with some kind of way of dealing with this, so I believe that the UK should have that. I mean, I don't know whether the UK has, but a methodology of dealing with these sightings, because there's just been so many of them. And I think it should probably be the same in Spain as well.
I feel that's best done with an independent body rather than a government body, because a government body will do it with different agendas or different pressures. Mm-hmm. And maybe if you do it more independently with all the key stakeholders chipping in, you can come to a less stressed and a less pressured perspective in dealing with it, and helping the police. I think often it's the police that need help and they haven't got the resources or the expertise.
Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, it ends up becoming a bit of just a grey area for everybody, as it were, and it really needs somebody to essentially grab the bull by the horns, for want of a better way of putting it.
But in an accountable way. I do stress, I think it has to be accountable.
Absolutely, Rick. And the real the crux of the matter in Spain, the difficulty we had really was down to anaesthetic, because the organisation, big reputable organisation, they wanted to take it in. They were too far away to send anybody that could administer anaesthetic, and if you're unable to anaesthetise the animal, then it's unrealistic trying to catch it. So local vets weren't able to do it; they weren't qualified to do it. So really, that's why the situation carried on. And I think it's a case of all the pieces need to be able to be put together in order for a situation to be dealt with.
Yeah. But the resources and the logistics are severe for that.
Yeah. Exactly. And also even the time factor, because you don't know if you can catch it or even when you can catch it, and obviously you'd have to have people on call, and so I mean it does become a very complicated situation. But I think I certainly see huge value in what you're doing in gathering the information, gathering the data, because in a way, what we were doing on a very local basis, just with our particular situation, you're doing on a national basis in the UK.
I should say, not just me, there are many other good people, helping, doing what they can. Yeah.
Exactly. I was just going to say, but through that information, that enables governments or, police or councils or whoever to be able to make better decisions, and to understand the situation better, I believe.
Yeah, I think also that what we have in Britain also is a significant segment of people are interested in the mystery, in the mystique, in the utter wildness of these animals, and that this is coming at a time when we're having this reaction to a consumerist lifestyle. And so a portion of people long for that sort of mystery and that wildness to be there. And this is happening by default with these wild card big cats, whereas you haven't got that in a place like Spain. It is just this one rogue animal, which, you know, people are going to have different views on, and it's an isolated example, so you haven't got that sort of rewilding connection.
Well, no, but do you know what, Rick, to put a broader perspective on it, the rewilding part has never left, you know, because the people there are very much connected to their environment. Sure. They didn't really seriously watch TV for until sort of like the last 15 years. Going out, planting, harvesting, it's all the knowledge of nature. They all know all of the plants, all of the trees, the uses, the benefits, etc., etc. So it's not a case of having to rewild. That knowledge is already there.
Yes.
And it's that's already part of that culture. And in fact, it was very interesting because, you know, if you did a little comparison to the UK, how many people think Morris dancing is really cool? Some do, most don't. However, the equivalent over there of their local traditional practices, rituals that go back thousands of years, all the young people, they really do, they connect to that, and they've never lost that.
Yeah.
So it's sort of the idea of a culture being connected to the local environment is very much still there, but how they connect is obviously in different ways. I mean, some become hunters and some keep olive trees. Yeah. So,
but this won't. There won't become a legend. There won't become a legend of the mystery of the cat of Almeria from this.
Well, I think the cat itself did become a bit of a legend over there. I mean, certainly, a lot of people were.
But it won't become a widespread sort of thing which is on postcards or celebrated. It will just be low key.
Yeah, I think so, because in a way, it's fear of the tourism industry. Although this is the irony. I mean, you know, nobody's going to not go to Bodmin Moor because of the beast of Bodmin, you know. But it's a case of over there they were a little bit more concerned about it, and or concerned about the possibilities of how that would affect tourism. Whereas I had a lot of people say, this is what has attracted me here. I think it's fantastic that there's this animal living like this, and the fact that we don't have all the information on it makes it even more fascinating.
Yes, sure. It plays both ways, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And that area, I mean, I do have to say, having spent 14 years living there, in terms of wildlife, in terms of the underwater environment there, in terms of the volcanic landscape, it really is a very, very special place. It's a very natural place. It's lovely.
Yes, it's under-celebrated. It's under-discovered.
It is, and for people that really like their wildlife or people into birding, it's a little gem. It really is. So that's my little plug for Almeria, I guess.
And Peter, how would you feel if there was some kind of closure on? I mean, often part of the mystery or part of the sense of what goes with the territory on incidents is that there's never any closure because people don't know whether the animal that they've seen or they've heard about has been killed or has died out or is continuing in its elusive way. How would you feel if you knew there would been some closure that a local hunter had shot it and that was it? You know, would you feel a sense of disappointment at that, perhaps?
Oh, definitely. That would be hugely disappointing. Yeah, it would be. It would be a great shame. And I mean, because for the last year or over the last year, there was no contact. So I don't know whether it is actually still there or whether it had expanded its territory. So let's put it this way: I think any hunter would have a very hard job trying to find it. You know, because I mean, for 2 years, it had really made itself known on occasion, regularly turning up, probably about once a month. But then after that, we didn't hear from it. So, yeah, I don't know. But I mean, certainly, It became part of that landscape, and a lot of people had never heard of it, or they'd heard something of it. And in actual fact, Rick, there were other stories from the area that had been earlier stories. For example, in the town 10 kilometres away, lots of people had their cats go missing, and years before, and they believed that was a big cat. And then 100 kilometres away, the mayor of a small town called Burha, had actually seen what he believed was a jaguar.
A black one, I should say, a black one, yeah.
Yeah, and whether it was a jaguar or not on film is obviously up for discussion, but he believed that that's what he saw. And so there had been, there was meant to be a shaman there who was meant to have had a leopard at some point, so from South America. So a jaguar.
Yeah.
So there's quite a lot of local folklore, as it were, with cats.
Yes,
in general.
And we get this. Yeah, and I know that the question I've had since starting the podcast is: are there exotic cats escaped from captivity and potentially breeding in other European countries where people presumably would collect cats? Well, the answer is, in terms of credible press reports that seem to have some consistency and validity to them, is that, elsewhere in Spain, there's been incidents. In Italy, there's been cases. In France, certainly. In France, there's been footage, very, very interesting footage, a couple of years ago in a car park of a leopard-like cat with a very leopard-like tail, or even a puma. You couldn't see because of the light of the photograph. But also Germany. In Germany, there were orders from one of the state's government departments to shoot it if it was seen again. The hunters were on alert and were said, if anybody gets the chance to take this out, then please do, because this is a rogue, wild, escaped black panther. It does seem that it does happen in other countries in Europe. Whether any of them have been out to the degree that they could breed on is another matter, like we feel is very much happening in Britain. So I think you just got a little snippet of it in your neck of the woods in Almeria. Peter, any final point you want to make?
Yeah, I just in a way like to sort of round it off by saying that the original purpose of us going out there was to observe this process start to finish in a very natural environment without water, electricity, mobile phones, etc. And we put all of that in. But in a way, nature came and really taught us a whole load of findings, but additional findings because of the episodes with the cat. So that's all really useful information. We learnt to make do with minimal resources and to really harness the environment in new ways and ways that have been forgotten. And a lot of that is the old knowledge that, for example, you can put blankets in front of windows, and if they're wet, that produces a type of air conditioning in a really hot environment, that sort of thing. And this type of archaic information is more and more important now, when there are natural disasters, so that people can actually have new answers and have new solutions.
Yes, sure. And I know, to go off topic quickly, you designed this amazing little structure called a bubble home. I think we'll put a link to that, even though it is off topic. But you were doing that on the land to create a little sort of igloo type dwelling, which is much more secure than a tent for a situation of disaster or somebody needing a shelter for months or years rather than just a few days after a disaster. And so your experimentation and innovation with basic elemental technology and materials was what you were all about there. So to have the cat making you feel even more elemental at times was
exactly. It was ended up becoming a great benefit, and it very much inspired people. And with the bubble homes, that's an ongoing project as well. And I mean, the idea of having accommodation that's halfway between a tent and a house is something that we've been working on, and how you can actually help homeless people, and also how you can help in areas where they literally have the whole country leveled.
Yes, and also refugees needing places.
Yeah, but basically making a new house from the rubble of the old house. This idea of super resourcefulness, of being able to use the natural world in ways that we've forgotten, is actually part of the future.
Yeah, coexisting with wild animals is also a part of that, a dimension.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was the added module that got added onto our university of life experience out there.
Brilliant. Peter, we're running out of time. I want to thank you ever so much. It's been a lovely excuse to go beyond Britain again in an episode of Big Cat Conversations. So thanks ever so much for being a part of it and telling us all about your experiences in southern Spain.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much, Rick, and thanks for all the help and the information and the advice you gave us along the way, which was passed on to many, many people. So thanks for that. And thanks for having me on your show.
Thanks, Peter. All the best. Okay, just before we close, a couple of points to make. The first is a pretty sombre one, because we must mention the severe fires in Australia, even though there isn't much more to add to all the concern that's been expressed already through the media. We so much enjoyed hearing about Australia's wildlife from Simon Townsend in episode 10, and now, just a couple of months later, it's desperately sad to hear of the widespread fires and the intense impacts on people and on wildlife through parts of Australia. I actually got a text from Simon today, 9th of January, and he says that his specific area of Victoria is not affected, but he's keeping a watchful eye on the conditions. So, to our listeners in Australia, we hope things recover as best and as soon as possible. And now a brief update on Lincolnshire, where we heard from Wendy and Angela in episode 13. Wendy was our first guest, and she described a puma which she encountered around a barn stalking the feral and farm cats, and in a nearby lane when she clearly saw it crossing the road. She also mentioned that her husband had seen a black panther close by the farm as well. And now, since that episode, Wendy has reported that her husband had 3 clear sightings of the black panther in late December. So there is still activity in the area, and Wendy's husband said 2 of those sightings were near the farmhouse, and 1 was right across the road in front of him, and he said it was huge. And very ironically, Wendy and I were discussing dash cams in the episode for filming a potential big cat if it came out in front of your car. Finally, for our next episode, we're going to be hearing from some big cat sightings and investigations in Scotland. And our guest for that show also encountered a mountain lion in Canada a few years back, and we'll hear all about that dramatic experience into the bargain. So stay tuned, it's Scotland next. As ever, thanks for listening everyone, and take care.